I was growing up, I got told a lot that I was broken. I got told a lot that I was destined to be alone forever because I wasn't forming relationships that looked like my relationships were supposed to look. So I'd go on walks with people and I'd just say, look, I just want to talk about the thing our relationship is in both of our lives. And I found that those conversations really transformed how my relationships operated.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. We look at the big invisible forces that are pulling at us every day, and this episode is about loneliness. Now, I once took a long trip as a college student by myself, traveling, backpacking, thinking that I was going to sort of find myself that way. And instead, I found that I was really lonely, and that for me, loneliness can be a really debilitating thing. And the problem right now is there's an incredible amount of that going on. People are reporting all across industrialized societies record amounts of loneliness. And that has to do, it seems, with industrialization, our sort of modern lifestyle in which we're working alone, we're living apart from our families, we're under pressure to perform. Those things are leading to real dissatisfaction, real loneliness in our lives. But here's the thing. This week's guest, David J., wrote a 2024 book called Relationality. I'm not crazy about that, making up words, but it's fine. I'll let this one go. And in it, he actually has a very sophisticated recipe for basically trying to create the relationships that we need. And as a society that we're going to need if we're going to deal with all of the fallout from loneliness overall. And he says it's not so much about being alone. It is about not being able to create the relationships we want. And that recipe that he has for doing exactly that is very inspiring, very interesting. I hope you enjoy this hour-long conversation with David J. David J., thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It is really exciting to be here.
I have to fully admit to you that when I first saw the title of your book and you were first talking about it, relationality, I have to admit that as a cynical journalist, I was like, oh, we're making up words now. The words we have are not adequate and we're making up words. But the more that you have talked about it and the more you have talked about your own relationships and how you conduct your life, the more I thought, oh, this is a guy who's really thinking beyond current relationships. Maybe let's just talk about how did you start thinking about relationships? Was it an outgrowth of the way you conduct your own, or was this more academic? How did you start thinking about it?
Yeah. And it really started with loneliness for me. Like I grappled a
Mm-hmm.
lot with loneliness when I was younger. So I identify as asexual, which meant that when I was growing up, I got told a lot that I was broken. I got told a lot that I was destined to be alone forever because I wasn't forming relationships that looked like my relationships were supposed to look. And what I found was that if I could think of a relationship not as just like this script of connecting with people romantically or connecting with people sexually, but think of a relationship existing anytime me and another person changed one another. Any
Mm-hmm.
way that we could learn to change one another was a meaningful source of connection, a meaningful source of intimacy. And that question of, okay, how do we learn to change one another in ways that we like? Really
Mm-hmm.
stuck with me, really became the center of how I thought about relationships. And the more I looked into it, the more I learned that relationships, this ability to change one another in meaningful ways is so critical to our health, our happiness. The academic research shows that it's the driving, the strongest contributor to human happiness, one of the strongest contributors to human health, cross-class relationships, one of the strongest contributors to economic mobility, interdisciplinary relationships, one of the strongest contributors to new scientific breakthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the likelihood that a neighborhood will survive a disaster, uh, the strength of relationships in that neighborhood is more
Mm-hmm.
important than the wealth that people have access to. We saw this also play out during the pandemic. So just relationships, this kind of abstract thing, but to me, I think a really, really important thing, and a thing I try to make concrete, are just so important to so many of the things that we value
Mm-hmm.
that I was really interested in trying to explore, what are these things and how can we more effectively invest in creating relationship in the world
Mm-hmm.
if it
So
creates so much that we want.
just to go a little deeper into sort of where you come from about this, I know very little about asexuality, and so I'm going to
Mm,
ask you something naive here, which is that I think my naive assumption would have been that asexuality in some way would be sort of bound up in being somehow not as interested in other people, or being more a more solitary person somehow. But what's so interesting to me is that through that discovery about yourself, that sexual relationships weren't necessarily going to be a big part of your life. You were in fact learning that you had very deep feelings about relationships with other people. They just may not have been sexual in nature the way it was for may have been for other people in your peer group. But that's really interesting. I like I say, I just don't know that
Totally. And I think
world
this is a
well.
really common misconception about asexual
Right.
people. We have the
Hmm.
same desire for deep connection that everyone else has. And I think when I was growing up, I had this sense that, like, look, it doesn't count unless it's a romantic and sexual relationship. It doesn't count
Yeah.
unless I'm dating people. And it was when I really began to form community with other asexual people. I started this website called asexuality.org that became the first real gathering point for asexual people. And thousands of us started coming together and saying, look, we don't think that relationship is as narrow as the world around us thinks it is. We
Hmm.
think our friendships count. We think the communities that we're part of count. We think our relationships with the more than human world, like our relationships with land, our relationships with animals, like all of that counts when it comes to fulfilling our human need for intimacy. And so
Hmm.
we're going to have this understanding of relationship that's just a lot broader. And we're going to say, look, whatever works for you to build relationship that matters in your life, go for it.
Hmm.
Like it's
And
going to count just as much. Like we're going to have, maybe some of us are going to have traditional partnerships, but we're also going to have do all these other forms of intimacy, and we're going to celebrate all of it.
I had a fantastic boss once upon a time who described to me what it was like to be, in her case, lesbian, and the thing that she was that she was we were talking about, we were comparing our Thanksgiving experiences. I was describing going to my grandparents' house and this, that, and the other. I was pretty young at the time. I was like, "What'd you do?" And she was like, "Oh, me and my girlfriend went to the desert and did a bunch of peyote." And I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh." And she was like, "Yeah, it's become sort of a tradition for me." And she was saying, and she said, one of the things that's nice about being off of the flywheel of
Mm.
conventional relationships is you get to make up new things, new traditions, new, customs. And I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting." And what you're saying reminds me of it, in that you're sort of, it sounds like you were sort of in the position personally where you're being kind of off the flywheel of traditional romantic and sexual instincts around relationship making, in a way kind of turned up your sensitivity around relationships because of needing to find community on your own and write your own script and follow your own path, right? I would imagine, as a young person, there's not a lot of role models floating around in your life who could tell you how to conduct your customs and traditions, what Thanksgiving would even look like for somebody with your predilections.
Yeah, and I think the big one for me growing up was around how I was going to have kids, right? Like I knew
Hmm.
I wanted kids from a very, very young age. Kids just like
Hmm.
lit me up. They gave me all of this joy. And uh, I had no idea how I was going to go about forming a relationship that was stable and committed enough to be a parent in. Uh, and what I started doing was kind of adding intention to my friendships. So I'd go on walks with people and I'd just say, look, I just want to talk about the thing our relationship is in both of our lives. Like, how is it showing up in our lives in a way that we're grateful for? And I
Hmm.
found that those conversations really transformed how my relationships operated, because suddenly we had a way of talking about the relationship in the relationship. We had a way of being
Hmm.
intentional around it.
And
And
how
as I
young are you when
started,
you're how young are you when you're doing that?
this is like early mid 20s, I'm figuring this
Wow.
out. Like when
Because
everyone
I'm
else is
trying to, I'm
figuring out
like,
dating, right? Like I'm figuring out
yeah.
this.
And the bravery, I mean, the courage it would take to go, walk with a new platonic friend and
Hmm.
say, "I want to talk about our relationship. I want to talk about how we relate to each other and what's important to me about my relationship with you." Like, that's not a thing that everybody can handle. That's a level of intensity and commitment that not everybody would handle gracefully, I would think.
Yeah, and I had to like, I would usually know someone for a year. I would give them a heads up we
Yeah,
were going
right.
to do this. It was really scary to start doing it, but it also sort of felt like a matter of survival. I was like, okay, unless I can figure out something, I'm going to
Hmm.
wind up alone forever. So,
Hmm.
I got to risk it.
Hmm.
And what I found was some of my friends were not into that, but some of them really liked it. Some of them were like, oh, it's nice to be able to think about more than just a romantic partner as a relationship that really matters, that I approach
Mhm.
with intention.